Hi, welcome to session 5. The topic of session 5 is blogging with English learners. I decided to split the topic of using technology to develop writing skills with ELs into 2 sessions. The first session is blogging, and the second session, which is session 6, is digital storytelling. And this way I can really focus in on one specific strategy and give you some solid examples on that without it being very overwhelming and too long of a talk. So let's take an overview of what session 5 entails. You're going to open by watching a video that talks about the metacognition involved in blogging. It's not just typing on a computer or writing on a computer. There's a lot of other brain functions that factor into blogging that can support our students. And this video is only about 1 minute long. Then you're going to read our readings for this week, examining the paths to digital literacies for ELs, blogging as an instructional tool in the ESL classroom. These are both academic journal articles. You're going to read blogging for ELLs, and then you're going to take a look at this comparison chart. Richard Byrne runs the website Free Tech for Teachers, which is a great resource. And in 2019, he did a comparison of all the blogging services for teachers and students. So he went through and made a chart that gives the pros and cons and features of several different blogging services. So you can narrow in on which blogging service might be beneficial to use with your students. Next, you're going to watch the session 5 video. You can reference the session 5 slides during the video or afterwards. And after you've watched the video and looked at the slides, you're going to head on over to Flipgrid and find the session 5 discussion and answer the discussion. Remember to post one original video and then record one video response to appear. And then that's it for session 5. What's nice about focusing in on a topic is that it's a little bit shorter of a module. I've included several other links related to student writing with technology, EL writing with technology, and I think these are very helpful if you want to learn more about blogging with ELs or just about creating and responding with technology to develop those writing skills. One I'm going to highlight is this one right here, Responding and Creating with Tech from ELL Frontiers. ELL Frontiers is a great book if you can take a look at it and read it, but I've copied this chapter which is all about production, responding and creating with technology for ELs. So if you have a chance, go through and look at the examples and tools and strategies they give you there. Once again, the only graded activity this week is the session 5 Flipgrid, one original response and one response to a classmate's video. This is just extra information about HyperDocs. You do not have to look at this if you don't want to, but some people are interested about HyperDocs and some resources you can have to kind of package a lesson like I have. So feel free to take a look at that or not. And we will get started with session 5, blogging for ELs. So let's take a look at how we can use blogging to support ELs writing development. When you're starting blogging with students, it's important to introduce them to the concept. Just because they may have seen blogs at some point on the internet doesn't mean they necessarily know what they are, their purpose, or why you are using them in an instructional format. So I always start out with talking to them about what is a blog. Have they ever seen one? What does it look like? How do people use it to share ideas and get responses from people? And then I usually like to share a video. The video I always shared was from this little clip from the Disney Channel show called Dog with a Blog. And this shows the dog blogging about what's happening with the family. You can watch that video on your own if you'd like to. This is a fun video for students because it's they think it's cute that the dog's blogging. If you have older students, you might want to take a look and see if there's a different kind of video that maybe shows other students blogging. I would definitely check out Teaching Channel. They have a lot of good videos that show students blogging. But this was a nice introduction to just what is a blog and what is its purpose. And then we started with a paper blog. I think this is really key to have students practice the steps of I write for the public reads what I write, and they make a comment. Then I read that comment and respond. So just that kind of step of, call and response, they need to practice it. It may be a little bit of a slower format in a way they're perhaps more accustomed to, which is writing with a paper and pencil. So I start with a paper blog. You can see there's an example of a paper blog right here. So students wrote paragraphs on loose leaf paper, and then their peers read those and stuck Post-it notes on there to comment. If you Google paper blog, you'll get a lot of examples. These are a few I've pulled with some links where you can go and visit them. But again, it's students writing and then peers leaving comments with Post-it notes. And then you can practice at this, or continue to practice at. The student can then read the Post-it notes and add their own underneath it to respond to their peers. So this is just a way to get inside the purpose and function of a blog with students and have them practice that. I should say that a lot of the images and examples I may mention are from elementary school students. That's the age I taught when I was in the classroom. So don't let that dissuade you if you have younger students in elementary or older students in elementary. You can take an idea or a concept and scale it up or down to the developmental appropriateness for your students. Or you can use the examples as is and maybe perhaps just tweak them a little bit. But I tend to choose examples that are going to be generalizable, but some of the pictures in here are going to be examples that younger elementary students have done. So when we're beginning blogging, you want to explore your blog together. Set up your classroom blog, explore it together, make sure they know the ins and the outs and what it looks like. And then you want to make sure you're writing about things they know. When you're teaching students something new, giving them new vocabulary, new concepts, new purposes for writing, that's a heavy cognitive and linguistic load for ELs to function and to process at once. So you also don't want to throw on a really complex topic at the same time. If they're trying to learn the blog and the new vocabulary and how that works, let them write about something they know, right? So that way they're not worried about, I have to learn the blog and I have to write about this complex topic, and one of the two I'm going to lose and forget about. So while they're learning the blog, let them focus on learning the blog, have them write about something they know, and usually that's themselves. So then once they get more comfortable with the blog, you can increase the complexity of the prompts and their writing. You also don't want to correct their mistakes. And don't be afraid of letting them use autocorrect. So you don't want to correct their mistakes at first, because that is going to raise their affective filter, create a lot of anxiety, and they're going to associate the blog with anxiety and failure and being told that they're wrong. You really want the blog to be a safe place where they enjoy writing and that they feel empowered to write. You don't want it to be a place that's associated with, here's where all my mistakes are highlighted and pointed out to me. And then don't be afraid of autocorrect. Autocorrect is a tool that students have to learn how to use. If it helps them be more effective communicators, let them use it. Okay, so let's take a look at examples. So how do we support our ELs while they're writing blog entries? So one major way we know that we can support EL's writing development is by the use of sentence frames or sentence starters. So while they're learning how to blog, you want to keep those prompts familiar and the cognitive demand low. And so perhaps we give them more sentence frames or more sentence starters as they're just beginning to use the blog so that they feel comfortable with the blog and feel that this is a place where they can be successful, right? We don't want them to struggle and associate it with, negative feelings and that would raise their affective filter. So, for example, this was one of my first graders' first blog entries, and it was, if you could eat one food forever, what would it be? And so you can see this is her answer, and the sentence starter that I gave was, if I could only eat one food forever, comma, I would eat blank. I would eat it because blank. And then I put a blank that said, ask a question. And so she filled in chicken. She said, it has good flavor, and said, do you like chicken too? Great for a first grader. So she felt really successful that she could get that out because she had those sentence frames helping her. Would she have necessarily needed that much support if she was writing, day in and day out? Maybe not. But this helped her kind of get into the groove of using the blog. Another support I'd like to point out is this PEP language lines, and these are a set of sentence frames for a lot of different reading skills. So here's cause and effect sentence frames, sorting and classifying, compare and contrast, evaluating, it goes on and on. And so we can see that these have different colors. And the reasons they have different colors is that they start off with more linguistically simple syntax, so more linguistically simple sentence frames, and they go to more linguistically complex sentence frames. So this is a great place to find some sentence frames for your students and have them up. Again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel and write brand new sentence frames from scratch every single time. If they're going to be written in a place, let's use them, right? Okay. So then you want to build the buy-in. If your students are writing on the blog, we want to really harness the one part of blogging that paper writing can never ever match, which is the authentic audience and worldwide reach it offers us, right? My students, I know it's like this for a lot of teachers, but when I would ask them to write in the journal that they kept for me, it was like pulling teeth, and I would get, how many sentences do I have to have? How many words do I have to use? Is this enough? And clearly they weren't enjoying the writing. They weren't really focused on improving their writing. They were just trying to muddle through and get through it. It was their least favorite thing to do. And I get it. There wasn't really a purpose for this. I was asking them to write this stuff, but why? And so, so I could take it home once a week and, write a comment or two and then be done. If as humans, if we are putting time and effort into something, we want to know it's useful and valuable and helping us, and that we're doing it for a legitimate purpose and an authentic purpose. And writing in a journal that no one will read is not authentic. So, unless it's a diary, I guess, but that was not what I was having them do. I was having them write for something that they didn't care about, they were not invested in, and it just didn't matter. So I can see the disconnect. So we want to make sure we're connecting that. We're building that connect for blogging. So we want to tell the families, tell the schools. We want to practice responding to comments to keep the discussion going. So when I started a blog with students, I sent home a note to the families, letting them know and not necessarily asking for permission. We didn't have to do that in my district, but letting them know that this is something we were going to be doing, giving them the URL to it so that they could check in and see and comment on their child's blog. I told teachers in the school, after we would do 2 or 3 blog entries, I'd send an email around to select teachers in the school who I knew were good sports and said, hey, if you have a second, read the kids' blog and maybe respond to one of them. It would really make their day. I also sent it to our principal, a couple other principals, teachers at other schools. The superintendent got it too. And every once in a while, they would log on to the blog, and there'd be messages from teachers, students at other schools in our district, the superintendent, our principal, and they were so empowered that other people cared what they were writing, that they wanted to write more. And this made them want to keep practicing and keep responding to the comments to keep this discussion going. And this writing discussion, if you think of it in essence, was a slow, like oral discussion too, right? It's the same premise. I say something, someone else responds, I acknowledge that response and add to the conversation to continue, and then it goes back and forth. We do that in writing. We also do that in oral conversations with each other. So they were practicing that back and forth using English, just in a slower format. So it was really benefiting their oral language as well as their written language. You can see this is an example of a student's mom who responded to her post about loving chicken. And like I said, blogging as writing development lowers anxiety for students, right? We know the affective filter, the concept of the affective filter as defined by Krashen. And when students have a high affective filter, that's stress, anxiety, lack of self-confidence, that inhibits ability to acquire a second language. It puts up a wall where nothing's getting in, nothing's getting out, right? They're not acquiring language, they're not learning it. When the affective filter is low, that facilitates risk-taking behavior in practicing and learning a second language. And writing is a really difficult skill. It's the most difficult skill in English to develop. This is where we are asking our students to take the most risk and make themselves the most vulnerable. So we really need to be conscious of how the affective filter is feeling in the room. Are students, nervous, or are they comfortable and feel safe in that place? And when they feel that safety, that's when they're going to learn the most and produce the best. The other part of blogging that helps lower anxiety is that there aren't erasers. Students don't need to make corrections. So it's easy to make corrections rather. So I'm sure we've all seen a student who has been writing with a pencil and then they realize they forgot something in the middle of their paragraph. So before you can say anything, they erase, 7 lines of writing, write the one sentence they were missing, and then forget the 7 lines they just erased, right? So it's more harm than good, and it's pretty defeating too. So, when you're blogging, you move a cursor, add a sentence in, erase a sentence. It really helps facilitate students getting all their ideas out, and focuses more on the idea and content of the writing than the actual physical handwriting or the physical typing. And then personalized instruction can be done through the student's writing. You can take a look at their blog entry and say, oh, I see I need to focus on use of commas, I need to focus on vocabulary, the spelling's a little off in some of these areas for, long vowel sounds. And it really helps you pinpoint where your student needs to grow. And if you can start to address some of those areas individually, then that student can grow a lot faster. Students can work independently at more complex levels. This is writing an entry done by a 4th grader, and I had just said, I'm going to be talking about blogging with some teachers. Tell me what you think. And this is what she wrote in her blog. I like blogging more than writing because when I write, my hand starts to hurt. Also, it's fun to push the buttons when I'm blogging. I also like to blog because when I make a mistake, it fixes it for me instead of asking someone for help. So in writing, I have to ask someone if I spelled it right. So if you do something wrong, it will help you. And that sort of helps you blog faster. It takes a long time to find out how to write. That's why I like blogging more than writing. So this was a 4th grade EL, and she was one of the most timid, shy, reserved students I had ever had. She was super funny, super smart, just very reserved. And you can see in here, she's giving you an explanation of why she likes blogging more than writing. I never broke it to her that blogging was writing. I didn't want to ruin that illusion. But here's all the things she's telling us she likes about blogging more than writing. And you can see these were all the impediments in writing that were kind of stopping her. She didn't feel independent. She always felt tied to me or to a dictionary or to a buddy because she always had to check and verify if things were correct so she could move on, and because she liked things to be perfect. So she always felt like she had to always ask someone. But this let her be independent. It let her, so she knew when things were right. She knew when uh, things were spelled right because it gave her that support. Um, and it helped her write faster. So it helped her get those ideas out quicker. And she said it takes a long time to figure out how to write. And we know that. It's the last domain to develop. And yet, this is what she's saying, that the blogging is so much better because it's helping her do that. It's helping her learn those things. You can use blogs with great word prediction software. So, for example, like Spell Better is one. I had a student who was an EL but also had an IEP for reading, and he wrote that blogging helps him learn new words and type better. And when he came to Northeast, which was our school, and started blogging, it helped him with his English, and blogging helped him communicate with other people. So for a student who's coming into a school in a new community, in a new language, and having difficulty communicating with his peers and making those connections, blogging helped him do that. And so that's a huge thing. Not only is it developing those linguistic skills, the writing skills, but it's helping him develop and become part of this community. And then it also increases engagement. So not only is there more like self-esteem and encouragement from people other than a teacher, right? So that's one of the main things. So it's not just Miss Essick who's saying, you're super smart and you're a really good writer and you're great, but they feel like they're still struggling and no one else is telling them this. So it's kind of hard to believe something that they're only hearing from one person. So they're getting reinforcements from other students, other teachers, other parents are reading this. So one of my students had said, I like blogging because people say nice things about our writing. And I said, well, I say nice things about your writing. And she goes, yeah, like it didn't mean as much. I'm supposed to say nice things. I'm supposed to. I'm their teacher. But the prompts gave them the opportunity to put their own spin on writing. So they felt like it was their personality being affirmed by other people. And it gave them an authentic audience for students' work. So because a blog could be seen by anyone in the world, my students assumed it was being seen by anyone in the world, right? So they would be excited to see and respond to followers' comments. Usually the followers were in our neighborhood. But, and you can see this was the map from our blog, and it would show, put little blue dots by where people had visited. So most of the time it was by us. But family around the world has the possibility to view. So now, if you have parents or aunts and uncles or cousins or grandparents in other countries, they can see what students are doing in school, and that's very important. The hashtag on Twitter, there's a hashtag comments for kids, and that is where people will post links to their classroom blogs and then put hashtag comments for kids. And then you can go look through and read some of those blogs and leave comments. So you get comments from different parts of the country. So I would go on to Twitter and say, hey, my kids wrote about, reading the book Chrysanthemum. If you have some time, take a look. And then other classrooms or other teachers would go and leave a message or two. And so that came from somewhere outside of Illinois, and students were really thrilled. Blogging also boosts academic language. So we know the 3 levels of academic language. Likely you've talked about this in foundations and methods. But blogging promotes academic conversations. So conversations are richer when students write before they speak, right? When they have time to think and gather their thoughts and put everything together before they speak with other students. So blogs give students that opportunity to practice academic conversation skills at a slower pace. They can practice giving and receiving constructive feedback, right? When you blog with students, you spend some time saying that, well, it is nice that you said cool as a comment under their blog. It doesn't really help them much, right? Tell them what's cool, why you think it's cool. Ask them a question to keep the conversation going, right? So we're practicing that back and forth and giving and receiving constructive feedback. And this is something you want to model, and reinforce in writing and discussions. So this is an example from my classroom one year where I made an academic conversation wall. And so you can see one of my students is writing her blog using it. So she was at this table right here, but she got up because she needed one of our sentence frames to help her figure this out. So how our academic conversation wall went or worked was, here's the whole thing. At the top it said, in an academic conversation, we can, and then it said, had a bunch of things. So it said agree, disagree, summarize, this is extend or explain, complement, suggest, support, other things. And so under each one, it would give the different sentence frames that we would use. And we had generated these together. And since I taught several groups in grades from grades K through 6 throughout the day, there was a lot of different levels of sentences because I generated them with all the students. And if we thought we came up with a new sentence frame, then we put it up on the wall. So this was towards the beginning of us having the wall. And then so you can see here's examples, sentence frames. So if they wanted to agree, so if we go back to her, this little girl, if she said, well, I want to agree with someone, what's a way I can say that? She could go up here and see the way we said it. How do you ask someone to clarify something or explain it? So if you don't understand something, we don't just say, what? We say, what's your evidence? Or can you repeat that, please? Or can you tell me in Spanish, please? So different ways for them to ask students to clarify. And the last thing we're going to look at is differentiated blog supports. So this is another way where technology can really help us. So when I taught with my students, I had leveled writing prompts and sentence frames that were easily accessible through QR codes. So I made QR codes with QRstuff.com and Google Docs, and they looked somewhat like these things on the bottom. Well, they looked a lot like it. So you want to make sure that you or your students have access to a reliable QR reader. So I usually use Enigma. Now your phone or tablet camera is pretty good at catching this. When I was in the classroom, it didn't have that function, so I used Enigma for my students on iPad. And so what we did is I took a blog entry or a blog prompt, and I had leveled versions of Blog Pro. So I had for students who were at lower proficiencies of English language, students who were at middle proficiency, and students who were at high proficiency. And I had different blog prompts, and I had attached them each to a different QR code. And I can show you how to do that at the end of the video, so that if you want to stay on to the video, you can watch that. But if you already know how to do that, you don't have to. So this is what they looked like. So students would scan the QR code, and if they scan this QR code, and if you scan this QR code, this will come up. And I created this in Canva. And so here's the prompt. Imagine you are trying to grow a garden, but your town has a drought. How would you give your plants water without wasting the water that's available? So here's the prompt. Here are sentence frames you can use. And then here's a visual word bank. So this is for students who are newer to English and need all of those supports. And when they scan it, they get all of those supports in one. Another example that's a little less involved, which is nice, is do you want to change something at your school? Why do you want to change it? And then here's a sentence frame to get them started. If I could change one thing at my school, I would change blank. I want to change it because blank. So if they scan that, this is what would come up. Oh. Here's another example of a lower ELP prompt I had that a QR code would link to. And I gave you a link to this if you'd like to use it. But this kind of ties into our last session of turning non-print text into something we can use with our ELs. So here is a non-print text. So I just found an interesting picture. And you can get an interesting picture from Google Arts and Culture. You can get it from anywhere. From what's going on in this picture, anything. So I got an interesting picture, put it in a Google Doc, labeled it with keywords a student might need, and then I put the prompt in English, write a story about this picture, but also in Spanish, Polish, and Arabic. And so that way I had it all packaged there, and I could use it from years to come, depending on whatever the population was of my students. Here is an example, sorry about that, example of one of the prompts for a student who was at middle of English language proficiency. And now that I look at it, I think I posted the same thing once. Oh, no. So the difference here is this said, do you want to change something at your school? Yes or no? What do you want to change? Why do you want to change it? So they were all present tense, simple syntactic structures. I want to change this. I want to change it because of this. And then this is more of a hypothetical. And so this is a slightly more complex syntactic structure. So if you could change one thing, what would it be? So this, while it's the same topic, it's having students use slightly different or slightly more complex sentence formats. And then for the higher ELP students, they have the same prompts, but they don't have any sentence frames to support them. So this shows you kind of the different prompts, the different levels of prompts you could have. So what I used to do, and we'll show you the example here, and you have a link to this example. So these are all QR codes to different blog prompts. And what I used to do is print them in a grid like this on Google Docs. And what I used to do is, just for my knowledge, is color code them. And so I have purple, green, and blue. I think purple might be low, green might be middle, blue is high. I don't really remember now. I'd have to check. But I just put a thin layer of a color around so that the students didn't notice it. No one ever noticed they were like different colors. It was just for me to know what level the prompt was. So I used these two ways. I would put these in this little grid, cut them up, and then I would put them in a little box at our writing station in our classroom. And so when students had time to write or when it was time for them to blog, sometimes I had a specific prompt that we wanted to do about a book we read or a field trip we went on, something to that nature. However, sometimes I wanted them to just be surprised and have to get a topic spontaneously and be ready to write about it. So I would cut these up and put them, mix them up and put them in a box, and then students just drew a random card and they would have to write, they would have to answer that prompt. So that's one way I did it. The other way is I took these cards and I handed them out at what looked like random to the students. So I would hold them in my hand and say, okay, I would pretend that I was passing them out at random, but really I was looking at the color coding around the edge and saying, okay, well, this is a student who has a lower English language proficiency, so I'm going to make sure that they get a prompt with more support. This is a student who has higher proficiency. I'm going to make sure that they get a prompt with higher support. So that's how I did it to the students. It looked random and no one ever knew what the colors meant or that they corresponded to anything different. But I knew, and that I knew that the students were getting this proper linguistic support for their ELP level. So that was one way I used this kind of color coding to help me support the students. Okay, so that's the end of our talk on blogging. Remember, you're going to complete the Flipgrid. There's a prompt on Flipgrid for you to respond to about blogging with ELs. And once you do that, you will be finished with this module and you can move on to digital storytelling. If you want to stay on this video, I'm going to show you how to turn a prompt into a QR code. If you know how to do that already, you can stop the video now and move on to session 6 whenever or move on to Flipgrid whenever you're ready. Okay, if you stuck around, let's take a look at how we turn blog prompts into QR codes. So there's a few things you're going to want to get started. And just a disclaimer, there's a lot of ways you can do this. This is the way I did it. It seemed to make sense for me. It was easy for me to do on the fly. So I always started with a blank grid like this. I made a table, insert table, and however many I wanted. This is 3 by 3. Then I found whatever prompt I wanted to write. So let's say I wanted to do the giraffe blog prompt. Okay. Then I could, so let's say this is what I wanted to do. This is what I wanted to open when students scanned the thing. So I would go on here, make sure I could get my link, copy the link. Then I would, go to this one. Then I would go to qrstuff.com. And this takes you to this website. And so since we already have our URL from here, remember we grabbed it right here, then all I'm going to do here is paste that. Right? It can be static, it doesn't need to change. And then you can download your QR code. I don't have an account, I never have. What you could also do, what I do, let's see if I can get this to work. Kind of move these apart. And so what you can do is essentially just drag that picture over to there. And I like to make sure, because I'm a little neurotic, that everything is lined up correctly. And if you wanted to color code them, what I do is just do a 1-point border in whatever color I want. So if pink is lower, or maybe pink stands for prompts with pictures, I don't know. So there's that. Now let's say here we are. Let's say I didn't have the giraffe picture right now. Let's say I just wanted to tell students who had higher levels of proficiency to write a story about a giraffe. So that's what I'm going to do. I would go to plain text and I would say, write a story about a friendly giraffe. And so now when anyone scans this QR code, this text is going to come up. It's just going to say, write a story about a friendly giraffe. It won't have any pictures or sentence frames or anything, but this would be for students who have higher levels of proficiency. So I'm going to grab this, move it over. You could also download it to your computer, and then when you get over here, you could go to Insert Image from your computer. 2 ways of doing it. I'm gonna center it, and then maybe, again, you don't have to put a border on there. I did because I liked them to be color coded. So maybe I pick this for blue for students who have higher levels of English proficiency. And then when I'm ready, I print this, cut them up, I'm done. What you could also do is, if let's say you're writing a newsletter, you could copy this QR code and put it in your newsletter and have students talk about giraffes at home with their parents using some new vocabulary. That's always an option too. So hopefully that made sense. qrstuff.com is a really good tool that's easy to use. And if you need any help using it or have any other questions, just let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in session 6. Thanks. Have a good week.